special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. The great British people have made their views on net zero known, unambiguously and unequivocally. A YouGov poll for The Sun has revealed the British public's #1 priority is tackling inflation and reducing bills, while reaching net zero is near the bottom of the list. Meanwhile, the Labour Party intends to force local councils to start building more wind farms, making us ever more reliant on unreliable, intermittent green energy. And as the race to the bottom of the Atlantic continues, in order to save the crew and passengers of the Titan submarine, we will be speaking to an Express journalist who has first-hand experience of this very trip, which explores the wreckage of the Titanic. The Shadow Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, speaking to a Romaniac conference in Birmingham today, has vowed to renegotiate trade terms with the EU, prompting concerns for a number of key Brexiteers. Could Sir Flip-Flop-a-Lot and his party ever be trusted in a post-Brexit Britain? Yesterday, our children were becoming cats. Indeed, a fellow GB News presenter transiently transitioned to a cat. But today it's horses, dinosaurs, and even the moon. But the crucial question is there an option to identify as a GNU? Well, or an imperial gallon of cider? Only for over 18, I'm told. But who better to have than Miriam Cates sharing her identity exclusively with us tonight? State of the Nation starts now. We'll also be joined by a pugnacious panel this evening, the criminal barrister and former Tory MP Jerry Hayes, and contributing editor to Novara Media, Michael Walker. As ever, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now it's time for the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening. Well, our top story tonight on GB News, 5 people inside a missing submersible, which was on its way to view the wreckage of the Titanic, have around 40 hours of oxygen left. It's being reported that specialist equipment here in the UK with the capability to help locate the vessel has been turned down by the US government, despite allegedly getting clearance from the MOD. The US Navy's...
US and Canadian Coast Guard, Air National Guard aircraft and the Polar Prince, which has searched a combined 7,600 square miles, an area larger than the state of Connecticut. These search efforts have focused on both surface, with C-130 aircraft searching by sight and with radar, and subsurface, with P-3 aircraft were able to drop and monitor sonar buoys. To date, those search efforts have not yielded any results. We know there's about 40 hours of breathable air left.
Our apologies there, just some technical problems with the vision, but I can continue to tell you about that submersible that the US Navy is now involved in the search of 76,000 square metres of the North Atlantic, and the family of the British billionaire and explorer Hamish Harding, who's on board, say they have great faith and trust in rescue teams. We'll keep up to date on that story throughout the rest of the evening here on GB News. Now, Nicola Sturgeon has spoken out on her first return to the Scottish Parliament at Holyrood since her arrest. The former First Minister of Scotland told reporters she's absolutely certain she's done nothing wrong. That's after she was arrested and released without charge following a police investigation into SNP finances. Miss Sturgeon wouldn't say whether she'd stand down from the party. A trial date has been set for January the 12th for the man accused of murdering 3 people and attempting to kill 3 others in Nottingham last week. Valdo Kalakani will enter his pleas in September. He appeared at Nottingham Crown Court today, charged with murdering 19-year-old students Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kumar, as well as 65-year-old school caretaker Ian Coates on June the 13th. The 31-year-old is also charged with attempting to murder 3 pedestrians by driving Mr Coates' van at them in the city centre. A trial date has been set in the United States for Donald Trump's classified documents case. It's going to take place on August the 14th. The former president faces 37 criminal charges of mishandling files and is accused of keeping US national security data. Trump pleads not guilty to all the charges. And some news in the last hour. At Edgbaston, Australia have beaten England by 2 wickets in the first Ashes test. Pat Cummins and Nathan Lyon completed a gripping chase of 281. The England team looked distraught, frankly, at the end of a tense 5 days of cricket, but the second test starts at Lord's next Wednesday. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News. Back now to Jacob Rees-Mogg.
A YouGov poll commissioned by The Sun has revealed that the British people's #1 priority is tackling inflation and reducing bills. Surely that can't be a surprise. Equally unsurprisingly, net zero featured towards the bottom of the list. The poll has highlighted the great disconnect between the Westminster establishment and the British people. The pursuit of the lower priority has sacrificed the greatest priority. Cheap energy is the key for lower inflation and economic growth. And the hasty shift to renewable energy has meant higher bills for and generally more expense to the public. Our energy bills, Britain's energy bills, are among the highest in the world. In fact, we're in 3rd place in energy costs behind Germany and Denmark, who I should mention have not left the European Union, not yet at any rate. And what do all 3 of these countries have in common? We are all heavily reliant on unreliable renewable energy. As much as 41% of British energy comes from renewable sources. In Germany, as much as 46%. In Denmark, it's as much as 67%. And even with all the renewable energy investment, all 3 countries have not been shielded by the rocketing energy prices from the war in Ukraine. And of course, part of the reason for the rocketing prices has been that there's been a reluctance to invest in new fossil fuel sources. France has been protected from this, where 2/3 of its energy comes from nuclear fuel, which is cheaper and more regular. So France doesn't even make the top 10 in the list of most expensive countries. Nuclear energy is obviously available when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, and we get it from the French when we're in that position via cables across the channel. But even our green comrades in the EU aren't going as far as we are in the net zero obsession. New petrol and diesel cars will be banned here in 2030, but they won't be banned there until later. And that's a decision that will make people in this country poorer, because the cheapest electric car on the market is the Fiat 500, which costs more than £20,000, and it's also rather crammed for a 4-seater. We're currently on track to ban new gas boilers in all new buildings by 2025. But air source heat pumps cost between £7,000 and £14,000, and ground source heat pumps cost between £15,000 and £35,000. The average gas boiler costs between £1,000 and £3,000. This is so much cheaper, and these costs fall on the British public. Now, all of this would get worse if Labour got into power. Only yesterday, Labour unveiled plans to force councils to start building more onshore wind farms, making us even more reliant on an unreliable source of energy. Surely the whole point of being government, surely the whole point of politics is to make life easier for the public, to improve their standard of living. But these policies make life harder. What we need to do is scrap the ban on new petrol and diesel cars, reverse the upcoming enforcement of heat pumps in new buildings, give more licences, as we are going to do for the North Sea and oil drilling, lift the fracking moratorium. If we can have local supplies, that helps our security and will lower prices. We have the resources to become energy independent, like the United States did, to the benefit of the British public. Let us not put more costs on people who are already suffering from a cost of living crisis. But of course, I want to know what you think. Mailmog at gbnews.com. And joining me now is my panel, criminal barrister and former Tory MP, Jerry Hayes, and the contributing editor to Novara Media, Michael Walker. Michael, surely government should want to lower costs for people, and we have the third most expensive electricity globally because of the green charges and green subsidies we put on.
Well, I think in part why we have particularly expensive energy at the moment is because we're very reliant on gas, our system, and obviously that's gone up in price because of the war in Ukraine. But I mean, I might have missed it, but I'm not sure if you mentioned climate change in your introductory monologue, because that's obviously the reason why we're doing all of this.
But we don't make any difference because we're 1% of emissions and China is adding more than our emissions in months.
Yeah, but if everyone were to say that, then we wouldn't get anywhere. And also, I mean, China has done quite a lot of development when it comes to green energy and a green transition.
But its emissions are still going up.
Yeah, its emissions are still going up, and let's hope it comes down soon, and I think they will be moving towards that. China next year is going to be installing twice as many battery-powered or car charging stations as the rest of the world combined, right? So I think this idea that we can point to China and say they're doing nothing, so we should do nothing. No, they've invested in thousands of kilometres of high-speed rail, millions of car charging equipment, and it's that country which has brought down the price of solar power. And I think that's what your monologue kind of ignores, actually, which is that a lot of this transition to a green economy isn't just about saying, oh, heat pumps cost 15 grand, everyone's got to put a heat pump in their house. It's about changing incentives so that the cost of these things come down. What we want is innovation from companies, which you've already seen when it comes to things such as solar and wind. We might need some nuclear as well.
Come down by 80 or 90%. Is that realistic?
Well, I mean, it has done. Solar's come down by 99%, right? So the price of these things...
Yeah, but heat pumps are rather different. They're rather more complicated technology.
Well, I mean, people would have said that once about solar power. I mean,
Not really,
the point I'm saying is that...
semiconductors where the cost per megawatt is...
What I'm saying is that it's a very static analysis, and I think that's what's throughout all of this Sun article. So this idea that the average cost of an electric vehicle is £50,000, that's what the Sun said.
Yeah, but now, I'm saying £20,000
you're saying
for the cheapest.
For the cheapest, right. Now, it is the case that Bloomberg, rather recently, said that they think that electric vehicles will become cheaper than fuel cars within about 3 years. Now, that's been pushed back slightly because of the increase in the price of lithium, but it's very much within the realms of possibility that these will come down in prices. Also worth pointing out to your audience, because I know that this will make lots of people nervous, this is just for the sale of brand new cars. It's not the case that you have to scrap your car.
Jerry?
This is a splendid excursion down what we would love to happen. I agree with Michael's analysis on where we are, that the world is changing, the sea levels are rising, there'll be all sorts of problems with ice caps. But at the end of the day, we cannot bankrupt our own people. That is the difficulty that we've got. I mean, energy costs are absolutely soaring. I think the timetable is unrealistic. And when you're talking about 2030 to get rid of petrol, it's not going to happen. Look, I want to buy an electric car, but it's not worth doing it at the moment, because you speak to any taxi driver who's got a Tesla, it goes to 250 miles, that's in the sunshine, and it goes down to about 130, not in the sunshine. There's not enough connectors to actually charge them up. So, yeah, I agree with every word. But on the other hand, people are really, really, really suffering.
That's right. People are being hit by higher prices.
That's right. And how do you get around that, Michael?
So I'd say how you get around that. One, what I would like to say, actually, is that I do find it interesting that on talk shows with a right-wing bent, they only really worry about rising prices when it's a reason to bash a green transition. No, I'm talking about this conversation. I mean, my rent's gone up by 12.5%. That's a much bigger cost than any kind of energy surcharge. Than any kind of surcharge I might pay because of a green transition. But what I'm saying is this.
Many times
I think what's being underplayed here and what's being underplayed in this Sun article is the extent to which a green transition also presents an opportunity. Now, I absolutely agree with this, that if the government wants to maintain support for a green transition, it has to convince people that that's not going to hit their pockets. But I think that is very much possible. But that's also going to be possible. Why has it failed?
Because it's consistently hit people's pockets.
So what this poll also shows, right, is that 60% of the population back going to net zero. Now, the country is evenly divided on whether or not they think going to net zero is going to hit their pockets. So the country actually seems very, very open-minded about this. What this seems to me to be is that there's a right-wing newspaper that wants to shift the dial. We've seen this over decades, between the 1980s and the 2010s. What did the right-wing do? They tried to say climate change doesn't exist. Now they say we can't afford to solve it.
It's not left-wing or right-wing. I'm not exactly right-wing. I served in Parliament for 14 years and
as a Conservative, I mean, that's all.
Yeah, I rather regard me as a bit of a communist. But at the end of the day, there are people out there who can't afford their mortgages. You can say all sorts of reasons why, but they can't. They can't afford to actually heat their houses. And what you're saying, oh, don't worry, there's going to be lots of jobs, it's jammed tomorrow. Very politicians' arguments. Jam tomorrow. They want to be able to heat their houses and feed their children.
And it's not just this, it's also the risk to business, because we've got Tata Steel asking for subsidy because its energy costs are so high. And this is a real problem, that we will simply import it and the emissions will be to the credit of another country rather than us, whilst we lose jobs and economic activity. This can't make any sense.
Well, you can also gain jobs, can't you? So what Biden is doing with the Inflation Reduction Act. But, well, I mean, if the future is going to be green energy, then it probably makes sense for us to be at the head of the curve instead of at the back of it.
How do people pay their bills?
Well, I mean, that's a very serious question. And I think how people should pay their bills is if we tax the rich a little bit more, did a proper windfall tax on the energy companies who are making big bucks at the moment and distributed some of that. Now, the idea that we can't...
You know the figures on that.
That deters investment.
Yes.
Well, we've already been losing investment in the North Sea, which is a key asset for us, that's revenue for the UK and helps keep prices down.
Well, so it deters investment in fossil fuels. Now, I don't think that's a particularly good idea, right? What I would like to see is you tax these industries, which we are going to have to wind down. Now, I don't celebrate that. You know, I don't think it's... Fuel is great, coal is great, oil is great, but we can't afford to keep burning it.
We're going to have to move on with the socialists wanting to close down industry. But thank you to my panel. I'll be back in just a moment. But first, as the race to save the passengers of the Titan submarine continues, we'll be joined by a journalist who has been to the very place in question and has a story to tell about the shipwreck of the Titanic. And we've heard of children identifying as cats this week, but now it's horses, dinosaurs, and even a moon. After these messages from our sponsors, I'll be telling you that I'm planning to identify as a gnu, the nicest work of nature in the zoo.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Julie, dear Sir Jacob, what I saw in the House yesterday was like a scene from The Lord of the Flies, reminiscent of the time when Parliament tried to overturn the result of the referendum. They may have got what they wanted, but we're still out of the EU. Let them stew in it. Martin, yes, China is pushing electric vehicles, but building a new coal-powered power station every 3 days to supply the electricity. Is that green? Now, the government is reportedly ready to help in the search for the submersible, the Titan, that vanished off the coast of southeastern Canada. The small vessel carrying 5 passengers, including the pilot, took off 3 days ago to explore the wreckage of the Titanic, which lies nearly 2.5 miles at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. To put that into context, that is the length of roughly 40 Elizabeth Towers, otherwise known as Big Ben. The Titan lost contact with its research base approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes into its descent, which is meant to take a total of 2 hours to reach the bottom of the ocean. The vessel has 96 hours of emergency oxygen, which is 4 days' worth, and experts warn they may only have a couple of days left worth of supply. The 5 missing people include British businessmen who were bolted in from the outside of the vessel and would need outside help to escape. We can only imagine how terrifying that experience must be. But I now have with me somebody who has been to the wreckage of the Titanic and has had an experience of how this operates. Daily Mail journalist Martin Phillips. Martin, thank you very much for joining me.
You're welcome, Jake.
You went down 2.5 miles to the ocean bed to see the Titanic. As you went down, what were the conditions like? What was it like being inside one of these small submersibles?
It was fairly nerve-wracking, but you're sort of claustrophobia and the exhilaration of what you're likely to see tends to mask the fear that is there in the background because you know the dangers you're going into.
And you go down and it gets completely dark once you're a few fathoms down, and at that point blackness descends and you just keep on going down and down, and it takes 2 hours of sinking.
In our case, yes, the Russian pilot of our 3-man vessel put the lights on for us to see the sea life around us as it started to get dark, but obviously want to conserve the battery, so he turned that off pretty quickly, and we were in darkness just listening to the echoing ping of the sonar as we sank for 2 hours.
And then you got to the seabed and you saw the Titanic. That must have been absolutely amazing.
Unbelievable. Our pilot put on the lights as soon as we got to the bottom, and there's a lunar-like landscape, and we motored across that, came across a wall of black, which we had no idea was the side of Titanic, and he rose the submersible up until we reached within touching distance of the bow rail of Titanic. That's where we arrived.
And are there any sea creatures down there, or is it too deep for
There are a few colourless starfish and ratfish, but not a great deal.
And what did you have in terms of emergency procedures? What were the people in the current submersible, what will they be going through in terms of emergency options?
I hope they have a little more technology than we did, but I don't suppose it's very different. The emergency procedures we had is that because it's an oxygen-enriched atmosphere in the sub, we were in fire retardant overalls, but we were told that would perhaps keep us alive for an extra couple of seconds. And beyond that, we were told that if we had an emergency at the bottom, the pilot's only real recourse was to drop the battery, the heavy battery, which acted as ballast, and we would hopefully float to the surface. But we were one of two of only 5 submersibles in the world that could reach that deep at that time, and it's not much better now, so not much help is coming.
Right, and so once you're at the bottom, the engine that is run on the battery, there's no other source of power to move the submersible?
No.
And so it would be sheer buoyancy that would get you back,
that's
back
what
to the
your
top.
hope would be.
And in terms of communications, clearly this has lost contact with the surface. What type of communication did you have?
I believe it was similar, just pinging text to the ship at the surface from which the submersibles were launched.
And what do you think can have happened from your experience? What's the most likely form of problem that would mean that contact could be lost?
I don't know. One hopes that it's a communication thing and nothing catastrophic has happened to the submersible. But that still means that before they can even attempt a rescue, which is difficult, the rescuers have to find it.
And when you went down, you saw the Titanic straight away, but I was listening to somebody else who'd been down on different outlet who said they only saw the Titanic for 20 minutes because they had to find it in the dark. So knowing precisely where you are must be quite difficult.
I guess so. The Russians who took us down had transponders on the bottom in 3 places so they could triangulate exactly where the wreck was. And as I say, our pilot brought us onto the wreck right on the bow
went straight,
immediately.
Went straight to
we
it.
spent 4 hours on the bottom.
And did you realise what the risks were when you went down? I'm sure they were made clear to you, but that's slightly different from realising them, that it's quite easy to be bold when you don't know how awful things can be.
They were spelled out in advance, but I think it's only when you climb into that claustrophobic tiny little capsule and the hatch shuts that it starts to dawn on you how serious this is, and that's a long way from the terror of something actually going wrong, which I fear is the case. Yeah.
And because of the technology, the space is very, very small. So the 5 people, it's standing room only, there are no chairs. So in terms of it being claustrophobic, it is really claustrophobic.
I guess so. We were in a 3-man sub, so just the pilot and bunk each side for 2 passengers staring out of a 7-inch thick, tiny porthole.
Well, let's hope the people currently on board safely get back as safely as you did. But thank you so much for coming in to see me this afternoon. Coming up, could the Labour Party ever be trusted in post-Brexit Britain not to renege on the largest political mandate in British history? Plus, Miriam Cates will be exclusively revealing her gender identity to State of the Nation. But remember, I'm a GNU. How about you?
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions, and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio, and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Bridget, having worked all my adult life, I never thought I would be struggling with the cost of living. I don't take any money from the state. We need to be sensible about going green. We can't save the world alone. Most people, including politicians, do not look at the term of new forms of energy. It should be part of the design feature. And Jim, how much does 2.3 miles of cable weigh? I think to rescue would be impossible. I hope I'm wrong. I hope you're wrong too. Last night it emerged that the disastrous and expensive HS2 project has already used up 1/3 of its cash reserves as the government wheeled out Rail Minister Hugh Merriman, who blamed the latest blunder on everything from the pandemic to the war in Ukraine. Thus far, HS2 has cost roughly £15 billion of your pounds, owing to what seems to be an infinite number of delays. The whole project is projected now to cost potentially over £100 billion, all for the sake of shaving 20 minutes off a train journey from Birmingham to London. I'm now joined by Conor Holohan, the media campaign manager at the Taxpayers Alliance. Conor, is this one of the greatest misuses of taxpayers' money that you can think of, or are there worse ones?
Well, thank you for having me, Jacob. It's got to be up there. And I think when we see this announcement yesterday, I think people across the country who are struggling with their energy bills, they're worried about their mortgages, they're labouring under a 70-year high tax burden. They look at the spiralling costs of HS2, they look at the delays and the excuses, and they just cannot believe why this hasn't been stopped.
And what is the argument for it? It can't just be the 20 minutes off the time. Is it needed for extra capacity? We notice that the railways do have problems with capacity. Can it run without drivers because of using modern technology and being more automatic, so less held to ransom by striking unions?
Well, there are arguments in terms of capacity, but there are plenty of other localised rail projects that some of this money could have gone on to improve local connectivity as well. But, you know, the government has been throwing good money after bad with this HS2 project. It's moved from one farce to another. And I think it would be better for taxpayers when the government finally decides to scrap this white elephant.
So you would like to challenge the sunk cost fallacy. You would say even though £15 billion has been spent, it is better to get rid of that, to accept that that's been wasted and stop now with all these disused bridges and tunnels sort of gently fading back into the countryside?
Well, like you said, Jacob, it's projected to potentially even cost over £100 billion. So, £15 billion wasted is nothing to be happy about, but £100 billion is a lot worse. And the Chancellor is rightly wanting to find savings so he can give taxpayers some respite. And he's rightly looking to Whitehall to find some of those savings. He could look at HS2. It's some savings that are staring him right in the face.
But wouldn't there be huge criticism of the government for apparently wasting £15 billion on a project that's agreed by all parties? The Labour Party and the Lib Dems are in favour of it too. So there's wide consensus that we need this extra railway capacity. And £15 billion is a lot of money to say we're scrapping.
And agree, but there's no reason why we should go 85 billion further. And I think that consensus may continue to fade away. The more people see, the more of a fast HS2 becomes. Only a few weeks ago, we saw that it may not even terminate in Euston. We might see it only going to Old Oak Common in West London.
And if it were up to you, what would you do with the 85 billion saving? Would you give it in tax cuts, or would you spend it on other transport projects?
Well, I think it's good, to be investing in transport links in this country. We're not against investing in transport links, but, like I said, people in this country, they're labouring under a 70-year high tax burden. They'd like to see that burden eased, particularly at a cost of living crisis. On Sunday, we celebrated Tax Freedom Day, the first day in which everyone's working for themselves and not the Chancellor. That's the latest Tax Freedom Day we've had since 1995 when comparable records began. We need to see that Tax Freedom Day coming earlier, and we can start by cutting HS2.
Thank you, Connor. Tax Freedom Day was on Waterloo Day, so an important day in the history of the nation. Labour Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy addressed the anti-Brexit group Best for Britain at a conference in Birmingham today, in which he doubled down on Labour's pledge to renegotiate Britain's trade and security terms with the European Union, while the leader of the opposition has promised the British public he would not renege on the Brexit mandate, as we've discussed before on this show. But he does seem to have something of a penchant for flip-flopping. So should we be concerned about the prospect of a Labour government coinciding with a post-Brexit Britain? Jerry, I think you're quite pro the European Union.
Well, yes, I Remainer. I was with David Cameron for the launch of the campaign. We got it wrong at the end of the day because the British people decided they didn't want it, and they decided 3 times. So I believe in democracy. We're not going to go back to it in my lifetime. We've got to make it work. But I think we've got to be a little bit careful here. I mean, to suggest that David Lammy, not perhaps the most trustworthy of politicians, is trying to bring us back into Europe, I think is a nonsense. At the end of the day, he's doing what Rishi Sunak has done, said, for heaven's sake, don't shout at the French. Let's shout at the Germans. Let's try and do deals with them. And as a result, I think we got a good deal with Chris Heaton-Harris, who was a major Brexiteer, in what happened in Northern Ireland.
Michael, you know the Labour Party well. Is David Lammy an outlier in pushing for closer relations with the EU? He was a very strong Remainer, both before and after the referendum. Or does he really represent where the Labour Party would go if it were in office?
Well, I mean, the Labour frontbench are Remainers, I think. I don't think that's a secret. But I also see no desire whatsoever on the Labour frontbench to reopen this question, which means that I don't think they're going to be rejoining the EU. I don't think they're going to be rejoining the single market. I think this is actually a much more modest proposal.
Customs union?
I doubt the customs union. This seems to me a much more modest proposal, which is to say, can we have slightly more frictionless trade? We will sign up to a few more rules and regulations from the EU, which the Labour Party, I think rightly, don't think many of the public really care about. The public cared about the big political commitments that membership of the European Union
once you sign up to rules and regulation, the question is who is setting them? And if they're not set by us, then you get back to the issue of the democratic deficit. And doesn't it show intention an issue around trustworthiness?
Well, I think there are certain areas of the economy or politics and society where a democratic deficit isn't necessarily the biggest issue. So when it comes to safety standards in goods and in certain goods and services, I think if we were to be rule takers from the European Union, which I think sort of closer alignment would probably mean, I don't think many people would think that's completely undermining British democracy. Essentially, you're making a trade-off, aren't you? We want to have closer trade with a neighbour. And if we're talking about prices, our last segment was all about having low prices for people. Low prices for people are generally helped by having frictionless trade with countries which are nearby. But if we're going to do that, we probably will have to take some rules and regulations from the European Union.
If we take rules from the European Union, it's harder to trade with other countries because the real difficulty with EU rules is that you limit the imports from countries that have different processes.
You
And
do.
the EU very much has process rather than end result regulations.
Of course you do, but you have that with any trade agreement that you have. Look at the trade agreement we've got with Australia, which some people say is not terribly good, but we have to go to agreed rules.
You have mutual recognition, which is different.
Yeah, but you have...
Mutual recognition is fundamentally different.
Yeah, but you have agreed rules, World Trade Organisation. We've had all this argument.
But the EU tries to impose its rules on its trading partners.
Yes, but that's not going to happen.
Well, if what Michael's saying was right, and we agreed their rules, then yes, it would, and that would then limit what we could import from third countries.
But things have changed. What Lammy was saying, and I'm no supporter of Lammy, is basically we must have closer relationships with Europe, but not, as Lee Anderson said, under the yoke of Brussels. I mean, that's dreadful. We must stop doing megaphone diplomacy.
He wasn't being serious, he was making a yoke. No, sorry.
Oh, very good.
I mean, that would only be the case as well if you join the customs union. So Britain is going to be free to sign free trade deals with other countries which don't enforce EU regulations on that country. That would be an issue if you're talking about a customs union and a single market, because
that
you have
becomes
free
very
movement of
difficult,
goods.
as with the Northern Ireland Protocol. If you have goods coming into the UK and you've got free trade with the EU, if the goods coming in don't meet EU standards, how can they then go on to the EU unless you have checks? So you don't get the frictionless...
Well, you might get some... I mean, you might have some degree of
checks are.
checks.
That was the thing.
The issue is, do you say, because it's made in Britain, you can sell it in the EU? Which I think is what a trade agreement would fundamentally...
I think Sunak's done a good job.
Well, we're now going to talk about the French in a friendly way.
Talk about the French.
We're going to talk about the French in a friendly way because the President, Emmanuel Macron, has come under fire from fellow French legislators after having voraciously glugged a glass of beer in 17 seconds. The critics have branded this wannabe Napoleon's behaviour as toxic masculinity, having been surrounded by the French rugby team who cheered him on. Have a look. Well, I think that's absolutely brilliant, and I'm on the side of President Macron. But do you think it's toxic masculinity?
Well, of course it's not toxic anything. It's a guy having a drink with a load of other guys who've just won a rugby match. It's fantastic. What's wrong with that?
No, I'm in agreement as well. I have to say, I thought when I was sent that segment, it was going to be another one of those ones where it's a controversy about two random people on Twitter saying it was toxic masculinity.
Yeah, but he's French.
But it was actually French senators.
He's French senators.
So there were some serious people who did think it was an example of toxic masculinity.
French,
and I think
you're
that
going
is
to be in
ridiculous.
therapy for a week because...
But this just shows how accommodating we're now becoming to the European Union. Who would have thought that on GB News we would be sitting here praising the President of France and saying that he'd done something that actually was quite fun, and who can criticise him for that?
But it won't be for long.
Well, we won't be drinking any beer to celebrate the English cricket, because unfortunately that went the wrong way.
But it was a great match.
Being an Imperial Measures man, you're a yard of ale expert.
No, I'm not. I can't do it. I tried it, and I nearly choked.
Michael?
Well, I was hoping we were going to get to test ourselves on a bottle of Corona.
Oh,
but maybe next time.
Maybe next time. That's something for us to try again. I would fail on that. I think I've never found drinking from bottles particularly easy.
No, I don't do it.
I prefer to drink from tankers, as you would expect. Thank you to my panel. Coming up, it's the moment you've all been waiting for. The moment both Miriam Cates and I've already revealed mine, reveal our gender identities exclusively to State of the Nation.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat.
Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
And action.
Sergeant, read my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Fridays from 8, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. For this segment only, I'm not going to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, but as a GNU, the nicest work of nature in the zoo, and this is State of the Nation. And you've been getting in touch with your male Moggs. Ian, HS2 is a money-burning pit, which would even make a Welsh Labour Council blush. I'm not sure anything makes Welsh Labour councils blush, but it's a good suggestion that they should. Trevor, I do not trust Starmer with Brexit. If elected, it will be Brino. Brexit in name only. And if they got a second term, I predict another referendum. Well, I think you're right to be suspicious, and I think we should take what Mr Lammy says very seriously. John says, I have the answer for any kids that identify as a cat. Just feed them cat food and milk until they're cured. I'm not sure the NSPCC would approve of that, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. Or indeed the RSPCA. I'm not sure which you would go to under those circumstances. Yesterday, the nation was seemingly shaken by a question of whether a human being can identify as a cat. After it emerged, a student was reprimanded for challenging such an idea. But just when the public thought we had topped the apex of identity hysteria, it later emerged that students have been identifying as horses, dinosaurs, and indeed, in one case, the moon. It seemed the news of equestrian, prehistoric, and lunar identities entirely eclipsed the previous controversy of feline identities. Now, things like this only seem to happen once in a blue moon, so it prompted Downing Street just earlier today to clarify that headmasters and headmistresses should intervene to stop children having such identities. And all this comes as the Prime Minister has just recently announced the government will be publishing new guidance for teachers that will allow children socially to transition with parental consent. Teachers will now have to tell parents if a child is questioning his or her gender, even if the pupil objects. The child will be banned from participating in sports, sharing a changing room, showers, and toilets of the opposite sex. As we discussed on this programme only a few months ago, a report from Policy Exchange found that many schools in the UK were not informing parents if a child expressed a wish to change genders. Well, feline, equestrian, prehistoric, lunar, GNU identities aside, I can exclusively reveal to you, as I've said, that I'm a GNU. As can I say, oh, you see a lovely GNU, the nicest work of nature in the zoo. How do you do? I'm now joined by Miriam Cates, who has also been anxiously waiting to disclose her identity. Miriam, what do you identify as for the purposes of this segment?
Well, it's nice to know what a GNU looks like. I enjoyed that. I don't know. I can't think quickly enough what I would identify as. Not a cat. I'm not a big cat and dog person, really, but yeah.
Well,
It's quite a comical story, really.
I think sometimes mockery in politics is an important means of showing that what is happening is sublimely ridiculous. But actually, this is quite worrying, isn't it? That parents haven't been informed, that children have been pressurised by schools for saying things that would seem perfectly rational. For a child to be told off for saying you can't really be a cat seems to be fundamentally unreasonable.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's a lot to unpack here, and we can only hope that that was an extreme example and that teacher was particularly misinformed and uninformed about the law as well. But it does beg a wider question, doesn't it, about how we've got to this point, because we can laugh about the silly animal identities, but actually this is very closely linked to the idea of gender identity, that so many, we know thousands and thousands of children are now telling teachers, telling parents that they identify as the opposite gender to their birth sex. And obviously this is a problem that is now, increasing in schools, and that the government has said that it will sort out with this guidance. But taking a step back, what's happened here is that we've forgotten what it means to be adults, and we've forgotten that loving children is not about giving them what they want, but about wanting what's best for them. And I think it's very clear from the evidence that it is not the best thing for children to tell them that they can be a different gender from their birth sex, to affirm feelings of discomfort that actually mean that they could be the opposite sex. I don't think that's loving at all. I think that's, really a failure of the duty of care of adults and of parents. And, the government is going to have a tough time trying to fix this. But I do think strong, firm boundaries backed up by law will make a huge difference to schools.
And isn't it also of fundamental importance that it's the parents who take responsibility for children, not other authorities, unless by order of the court, because the parents aren't fit parents, which is a tiny, tiny minority. Parents have the greatest concern and love for their own children and are the best positioned to understand the issues and the difficulties children are facing and to help them if they're having these sorts of discussions, rather than schools or social workers.
Absolutely. The best way to keep a child safe is to maintain their relationship with their parents. I mean, that's absolutely true. It's the first rule of safeguarding. And so it is wrong that schools have been concealing these safeguarding issues from parents. And don't forget, if a child does reveal, let's say that they have discomfort with their body, that is a safeguarding red flag, because so often these feelings come with many other conditions. Autism, children experience bullying or abuse. They are things that need to be investigated, not just accepted. And so, of course, parents should be involved. But I do think we need to separate the issues of parental involvement, which is absolutely paramount, and what parents can actually consent to. Because if the leak that you mentioned is correct, the new guidance, the draft guidance at the moment says that as long as parents consent, then a child can be socially transitioned at school. Now, I don't agree with that, because, we wouldn't allow a parent to say, I want my child to have this particular drug. If the doctor is saying, no, hang on, that's not the best thing for your child can't have that, the parent doesn't have the rights to demand that. The same with, a parent couldn't say, I want my child to drink alcohol in the school premises. It doesn't matter if the parent consents. The rule is no. And so I think we need to have the same kind of approach here. We don't socially transition children because it's not the best thing for them. There isn't the evidence for it, whether or not the parent consents.
But to what extent do the principles apply that apply over contraception, which were settled by the courts some decades ago, that contraception could be issued to children without the parents' consent and that the parents didn't have to be informed? Does the same principle apply in this case?
Well, I don't think it does, and I'm not a lawyer, but contraception is obviously, a medical treatment, if you like, or, certainly something that can be medically prescribed with a known outcome and known potential risks. So you could therefore argue that a child of a certain age could make their own decision about what are the potential benefits and risks of taking that particular treatment, because it's known. The thing about social transition is unknown. We do not know what kind of outcomes this kind of psychological intervention on children will have. And you've probably been following the government's new guidance for the gender clinics, and the NHS has now decided that puberty blockers cannot be given to children except as part of an agreed and ethical experimental study. So, if we're going to go down this route of saying we can transition children, well, it is an experiment. We've got to admit that. So I would say that the rules, I think they're called Gillick competence around the contraception argument, don't apply, because the risks and the potential benefits of socially transitioning are not known. So how could any child consent to that?
OK, if I remember rightly, it was Victoria Gillick who brought the case. But would you say that if these drugs, which the NHS has now said can't be prescribed, if it said they could be, would that be something that could be done confidentially? Or do you still think that this is such a serious level of change that parents would have to be informed?
Well, I think parents absolutely would have to be informed. But, I do think we shouldn't be giving them to children because, some advocates for them say that they're reversible. There isn't that evidence that we don't know that they're reversible. They could inhibit brain development. And certainly the vast majority of children who start on puberty blockers do end up going on to cross-sex hormones, which give permanent, life-changing results. And I don't think any child should be taking those kind of decisions. But of course, we're not talking about that kind of medical intervention in schools here. We're talking about changing the social aspects of a child's life, their pronouns, their names, toilets they use, which often can be the first step on this transition. But at the moment, schools are allowing this to happen, and I think the government should put a stop to that.
And will this be in the government guidelines, and will this be the law and enforceable, or will schools be pretty free to carry on doing what they like?
So I don't know, obviously, yet what's in the guidance. It's still being drafted. Obviously, I very much wanted to say that schools do not have the authority and the training to transition children and make that very clear. But in terms of it's not statutory, and I think the government should make it statutory because otherwise...
Unfortunately, we're going to have to draw it to close there, but Miriam, thank you so much for joining me. That's all from me. Thanks. Up next, it's Professor Daniel Wooten. Professor, do you identify as such?
Well, look, I certainly don't identify as a moon, which some of our kids are now being allowed to do at school, Jacob. So I'm going to be continuing that conversation with a special digest tonight. Also on the way, Susan Hall. Is she Sadiq Khan's worst nightmare? Could she be the person to reclaim our capital? And has Meghan Markle been faking it in her podcast? My royal scoop getters are investigating.
Well, that all sounds quite fun. Really easy for us presenters if we just get other people to do it for us. Anyway, that sounds very exciting. That's coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this has been State of the Nation, and it's sunny in Somerset, and Somerset did very well in the 2020 yesterday. Better than England today.
Hello, it's Aidan McGivern here with the GB News forecast from the Met Office. If you've been affected by any of today's showers, well, they will ease through the evening with clear spells developing overnight, but further showers expected on Thursday before more widely sunshine and higher temperatures at the end of the week. Low pressure at the moment has brought areas of rain and showers across many parts of the UK. One system clears the east of Scotland, pushing into Orkney and Shetland overnight, but only as outbreaks of mainly light rain. Showers elsewhere tend to disappear, although a few will keep going across western Scotland, Northern Ireland as well. Parts of Wales perhaps seeing the odd shower overnight, but otherwise clear spells. A fresher night, I think, compared with recent nights, but still warmer than average, with temperatures staying at 14-15 Celsius in the south, 12 to 13 further north. We're soon seeing those showers develop once again across Scotland and Northern Ireland on Wednesday morning, and then central and western parts of England as well as Wales. Once again, these showers will be highly localised. In some places there'll be downpour after downpour with some hail and lightning. Other places will stay dry and avoid the showers, particularly towards the southeast where temperatures will reach 27 or 28 Celsius, but fairly widely across the UK, low to mid-20s are expected away from any downpours. Showers will only keep going until about 8 or 9 p.m. and then clear spells and dry for many overnight, but it stays mild with temperatures up and down the country largely holding up in the teens and perhaps a degree or so higher compared with the forthcoming night. And so it looks like it's going to be a fairly muggy one once again, but widely sunny skies as we start off Thursday. And for many, it will stay that way into the afternoon. However, some clouds will bubble up once again.